Today we have a Babboe Big. It's a cargo bike, or what we use it for is hauling around kids. So it's got 2 benches, seat belts for 4, and 2 wheels in the front, 1 wheel in the back. And we're going to electrify it. So this bike is human powered, which it's pretty easy to get around and stuff. It's got, in the back here, it's got an internal gear system. No gears in the front here. And so I can't put in a rear hub motor. And in the front we have what appears to be some sort of drum brake, and it's on both sides, so we can't put in a hub motor in the front either. But what we can do is put in a mid-drive kit in the where the crank is. And so this is what we got. Picked up a 1000-watt Bafang. And these are the parts that come with it and the battery that I got for it. So we're going to throw that on this bike. We're going to get started by just flipping the bike over and pulling the crank. I have the bike flipped upside down here, and we need to take off this guard, and we need to take off the pedal arm and the crank. We have to pull the crank out. So I'll start off by taking off the guard here, and it's just held on with a couple of Phillips. Now we need to pull out this bolt here. It's 14mm on this bike. So now we need to pull the crank off. Sometimes you can wiggle it back and forth and get it off if it's not on super tight or anything. But generally you're going to need a crank puller. Just threads into the crank arm. When we get that cranked in, it doesn't have to be super tight, and then this bolt here pushes on the crank itself, and the arm should just pop right off. Ooh, knocked you guys out of place there. Hold on. There. And there's the crank off. I'll flip you around so you can see me pull the one off the other side. So again, if you have a cap, you might just have to pry that cap off with a screwdriver. We have to pull the bolt out. So now we need to use the crank puller to pull that off, and again you just thread that into the crank itself, crank arm. And that one doesn't have to be in tight. You just want to get it in far enough that you're not going to pull the threads out. That's why it has this so that you can put a wrench on it, but you don't want to use a lot of, if you're using a lot of force to put it in, you're going to have a hard time getting it out for starters, but you could actually end up damaging the threads in there. I believe these are just like an aluminum or aluminum alloy or something. And then this is just going to push the crank arm off. There we go. So the next thing we're going to have to pull off is this piece here. And I recommend using a big monkey wrench. No, I don't. But if you have to, you can. I recommend using the proper tool. You can pick these up for not too much. And that way you're not damaging the frame like you might scratch up the paint and stuff if you're using a monkey wrench or pipe wrench or whatever you want to call it. In the past when I was younger, I used to just use a screwdriver in there and tap it around. And that does work too. But again, that buggers up the look of it. It's not as nice and clean looking. It gets damaged sometimes. Oh, there's the bearing. And we've got to take the other side off, so I'll flip the camera around for you. Okay, so we're over on the other side. This side here, again, you could use the pipe wrench to turn this off. But if you've got the right tool, might as well use it. They're usually not that expensive. This is the one where it's clockwise to loosen. And there's the crank out. So you can see in there, just a little bit of grease. So we got the crank out. Next step is to see about putting the motor in. So when you're ordering a mid-drive kit, they give you they say that you need to order the right bottom bracket, and what you might not all know is what is the bottom bracket size, and that's this dimension here, from the one end of your crank to the other. So this one is can't really see, it's about 67 or 70. It's under 70 anyways. Fat bikes are usually a little bit wider. I thought this bike would be bigger, but it's not. This is a standard one, and they range in size. And what that measurement is on the motor here, that's to allow so that you have enough space to go from where this gear is to where the threads are. And you want to make sure you've got some threads on there, of course. You don't want it to be way over here. So you have to buy the right size bottom bracket, it's called. So this is the right size bottom bracket for this bike, but there's a different problem with this one. So the bottom bracket on this one measures up to the beginning of the threads 65, so it can't be smaller than 65. I'll put the specs at the top of the page here of what I bought, so you can see what this one is. This one goes, looks like up to 90 mil from the, I can't get right in tight here, there's a bit of a indentation here. But this is the spec on the one that I got. Now, like I said, I'll put the specs at the top so you can see. Now the problem with, not with the motor, but with my bike, or the bike that I plan on modifying here, is the space between the crank and here is not very big. We maybe have like 10 centimeters clearance. There's a lot more meat here. So if we measure that, that's closer to 20 centimeters. Sorry, 2 centimeters, 20 millimeters. So we're going to have to remove some of this material. So I'm going to have to move these wires. So I'll get these wires out of the way. And we're going to have to grind out a little bit of this to make room for it, and then weld it back up so that it's retained some of the strength there. I think the amount of material that I'm going to remove, and because I'm going to weld in some more material, I think it's still going to be strong enough. Alright, so let's get started with that. The motor fits in through here like this, and you can see it's hitting the frame here, so I'm going to have to remove some metal, and I'm not sure exactly how much to remove. I've measured from the space in here, and it's about 10 mil, give or take. So I've marked it out here. I just scratched it into the paint. I measured up 10 mil and kind of measured out what I need to remove there. So I'm going to drill some holes and then try and get a blade in there and cut it, or I don't know, maybe I'll grind it down. Now with that first section of metal removed, you can see there's a little bit more material that needs to be removed. So I'm going to have to mark that out. And what I've done is I've taken a file and I've just kind of sharpened the point because I don't have a proper scribe. So this is nice hard steel, so it scratches the paint and the metal pretty good. So I'll mark that out just by can't really do it with you guys watching though. So I've scratched out how much more material I need to remove there, and that corresponds to this tab here and this lobe over here. So I'll remove that material just with a hacksaw because my blade on my jigsaw broke. So instead of cutting this piece out and this piece out, I'm just going to bend them over. That way when I fill this with, I can have something to hold it up a bit and something else to weld to. You can see we're good there. Just need to remove a little bit of metal over here on this side. Doesn't look pretty, but we'll clean that up. So I saved you a little bit of the grinding. You didn't have a very good angle, but I got this cut down so that now the motor slides in place. But before I put that in place and bolt it all up and everything, I want to patch this hole a little bit. I've got a piece of metal that I want to put in there. I have the only steel that I have is this square tubing. Here, let me zoom out a bit for you. So I have this square tubing, and what I've done already, I saved you watching me cut this with a hacksaw. Cut a section of that off, and here it is, cut off. I ground it to clean off some of the rust and stuff. I want to fabricate it, like bend it so that it fits inside of here, because it can't sit above this because the motor's really close there. So it's going to sit inside here, and it's going to have that curve on this end and a curve on that end. I'll try and get it in there as best I can, and so I'm going to manufacture that piece. So let's go to the vise and bend this up a bit and see what we can do. First thing I want to do is put a bend on this end, so I'm just going to put it in the vise and bend it over. So I've got a bit of a bend there, looks like it's coming along pretty good. I'm going to put a bit of a bend here now, and then round it over there. So it's coming along. So now I just got to bend it back and then up. So what do you think? If I grind, take those off, kind of fitting in there, eh? I have to narrow this too. It's too wide to fit in there, so I have to take a little bit off each side and get it down in there around over these corners. Then we'll try and drop it down and see how it looks. So, pieces fitting in there pretty good. It's got to come down, so these tabs here that I bent over, I thought that was going to be helpful, but it's not. So I'm going to remove those, and I'm going to clean up these edges a bit. They're very rough from grinding and sanding, filing. So I'll cut those off, and I'll clean this up. I'll remove some paint, and I'll be back. It's looking not too bad. It's a little bit deep there. But it's not too bad, actually. Not bad for my first metalworking job. I'm going to see if the motor slides in with that piece in there. I tried to set it up so you guys could watch, but you guys kept getting in the way, and you're to blame for my poor welding. It's going to hold. It's got good penetration, but my eyesight isn't what it used to be, so it is what it is. But the beautiful part of this is once we prime and paint it, and put the motor on, it looks beautiful. Bit of primer. So there's the section of the frame that I removed. I'm going to put some weight on it, and you tell me if you see it bend. So how did that look? Oh yeah. This is the holder for the motor on this side of the bike. There's teeth on here that are supposed to go towards the frame of the bike so that they dig in a bit. So make sure you put it on the right way. So you'll notice there's a bit of play here. They say that when you install the motor, you want to make sure that the torque, because when this is driving the back wheel, it's going to apply torque. So you want to twist it so that the torque is, it's not going to click or move. So you want it already against the frame. So when you put on the final nut here, and that'll lock it to here, because those little teeth, like I said, will dig into the frame a bit. So when you put this on, you want to make sure that you've got the torque from the motor already loaded against the frame of the bike. So once this nut is tight and you've got the torque twisted towards here, there's a second nut that goes on, and this nut locks that nut for one, but it also has a bit of a groove there. It covers up and makes that other nut look nicer by covering it. Kind of like a bling ring, I guess. I don't know if the wrench will fit on there. Oh yeah. Normally I wouldn't recommend being on the threads here, but because of this frame here, I really don't have much choice. Okay, so that's locked on. Now to put on the pedals. When you're putting on the crank arms, make sure you put the left and right on the correct side. They will go on the wrong way. There's a marking, or should be a marking L and R. And there's the left. So the left side is, when you're sitting on the saddle, the left would be your left foot. Right is always the crank side. And you make sure you have the right and left side for the pedals as well. The kit comes with 2 pedal arms. So the key to getting these on is make sure you got them 180 degrees different from each other. And it comes with nuts as well. And one thing nice about these is they seem to have some Loctite. The other nuts, the other screws came with Loctite as well, so they lock on pretty good. It's a nice little feature. We have to take the pedals off the old crank arms and reuse those. You get new crank arms, but you have to reuse your pedals. I have a little bit of a problem with this. This new gear is much bigger than this gear, so I'm either going to have to get a new gear that's smaller, or I may have to lengthen the chain. I'll see how the motor does with this gear, and I won't be able to reuse this ring to cover the like the chain guard, sorry. I won't be able to reuse it unless I modify it somehow. But for now we'll run it without the chain guard. So here we have the gear side. We want to make sure we have the right pedal. Not the correct pedal, but actually the right pedal. And the right pedal should spin on in the usual clockwise direction. Okay, so that's the one side, that's the right side. Let's do the left. So the left one, we have to remember it's a counterclockwise thread, so you're turning it backwards to the way you normally put you normally tighten something. So instead of going clockwise to tighten it, you go counterclockwise. So you can imagine if you're pedaling, as you pedal, you're tightening by turning counterclockwise. So the pedals are on. We can start running wiring and hook up the chain. I may have to use a different chain because I think with the, like I said before, the gear here is bigger, so I'm going to need a longer chain if we haven't got enough play. Yeah, I think we're going to need a longer chain, or I'm going to have to add some links to the old chain. But we also have to run the power, and we have power for the battery, and then we have power for, we have some connections for the brakes and for the throttle and the display. So I was looking at the cable for the power, and it has this wrap on it, and I noticed there was kind of a bulge at the back end here, and I don't know, what do you think that is? Does that look like a fuse to you? Looks like a fuse to me. Looks like a circuit board with a standard fuse. I don't know, it's probably soldered on there, but yeah, that's something different. So if you ever don't have power, I would check the fuse in there. So I've loosened off the screws that are holding the shifter and the brake in place, and so I can move those, but the grip is really tight, and I don't know if you know this little trick, but you take an air compressor, you blow air in here, you got to plug the hole on the back, and it pops right off, just like that. Now, because we've loosened the screw that holds these things will slide off, and we can put on the ones that come with the kit. You need a new brake cable that has a wire in it. You get a new brake cable that has a switch in it, not just a wire. The switch kills the motor when you apply the brake. It'll kill the motor, so that if you've got the cruise control set, or if for some reason the motor is trying to power, as soon as you hit the brake, it should kill the motor. So you need to put that on. And I'll put the shifter back on. And then the grip. Back these things up, and we'll align them and tighten them up. So now that you have the shifter locked in place and the brake lever in place, and you want to make sure that you have full range for the brake lever so that it's not binding against the shifter or anything, and it's aligned with the handlebars so that it's comfortable. You need to hook up the brake. I didn't show disconnecting this, but it is pretty straightforward. There's a slot in here, and there's a slot in here, and you line it up with the slot there, and the cable will fit through there. And this just simply drops in here. Feed the cable through that slot, or down that slot. And that's it. And of course you'd adjust the brakes so that you have the right tension on there. Usually what I like to do is have a little bit of a adjustment. Generally, as the brake cable stretches, you're going to have to push this out. This is the adjustment, and then this is the lock for it. So I usually have it set so that there's a little bit going in and most of it allowed to go out. That way I can, if it gets too tight, or if you get a bit of a bent rim or something, I guess that's not a problem with this one. But it gives you a little bit of adjustment to loosen the brake in case it's rubbing a little bit. I try to get it as tight as I can on the other end. This way I can loosen it or tighten it by going in or out. And then there's your wire that's going to be run down. Usually I tie strap it to the other cable here. And that keeps the cables nice and tidy. I have a rear rack battery here that I have to mount to the rack. So I'm going to make sure that the lock is going to be on closer to the seat post so that it just slides in. There's a handle on the other end. And the battery pack came with this plate. I think you're supposed to buy a rack, and it probably has holes drilled in the rack in the right spot. But this one actually lines up with these these cross beams pretty good. So I'm just going to drill some holes in there. It's a steel rack, so I'll drill some holes in it. I'm going to go straight through and just put a lock nut on the back, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere, so that's what I'm going to do now. I've already just marked the center of the holes, so now I just need to drill it. So I'll drill it and we'll bolt that on. So there's the holes drilled. We'll put the plate in, and the bolts that I have are stainless steel, so they shouldn't rust, but they're not as big as I'd like, but for now I think they'll be fine. I wanted to go one size bigger. I think these are an M5. I had some bigger bolts, but they weren't long enough to go straight through. Each one will get a nut and a washer, lock nut and a washer. It's a very snug fit. I'm sure that'll loosen up a bit over time. One of the most important things about tie strapping is have some good cutters so that you can cut the tie straps flush so that they're not razor blades. If you're reaching in back here, you're not going to slice your hand up. Usually if you cut them with cheap cutters, it leaves a little bit sticking out and it's like a razor blade and it'll cut you for sure. So I'm going to put the thumb throttle here. I just need a little bit more space here. And I have to pull this off. So I'm going to pull this off and then I'll move the brake lever over. And to get this off, I'll use that same trick with the air. And I guess you have to make sure she doesn't hit the, instead of hitting the bell to let people know she's coming, hit the throttle. So the this comes apart so that you don't have to take everything off to mount this. However, the rubber pieces that they give you are solid. So they want you to take everything off just to slide this on. And there's two pieces of rubber here. So you've got for different sizes of handlebars. So you have to figure out what size you need to fit your handlebar. One or both. And instead of sliding them on, though, I'm just going to cut them. So I'm just going to use a razor blade, an X-Acto knife or whatever, and cut it. So now with it cut, I can just slip it over and I can figure out what I need. So this one here is too loose. This one fits, but it'll be too loose this way. So I'm going to need both. So what I'm going to do is, because I've slid it, I'm just going to stagger the joints so that one is on the bottom, one's on the top. Something like that. So bottom, top. So that's what it's going to look like. So on the other bike that I installed one of these, I modified the mount because I couldn't mount it in the center of the handlebars here. I mounted the whole display off to this side, and so I put the pedal assist beside it on the right side. I'm going to see how it fits on this side and how easy it is to access and stuff. I'm going to try it on this side. The bell's in the way a bit. I want the bell to still be accessible, Here, I'll rotate you so you can see what I'm talking about. So you have the throttle, you have the bell, and I think it's not too much of a stretch to hit the plus and the minus if I put this over here. So that's what I'm going to do. Try it on this side. I'll show you the other bike that I've done, how I've modified the mount and put it on. Here we have the other part of the wiring harness. It's got the connectors for the brakes, the computer, and the throttle. And on the other end, it's got this big plug to plug into the rest of the into the motor. So I'll hook up this end. So there's these covers on here. If you're not connecting everything, you would leave the cap on so that you keep the rain out. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I installed the brake on the right side but not on the left side, and I'll show you that, the reason for that. I'm gonna have to figure out how to modify that brake so that I can do that, but it's pretty much as easy as you pop the cover off, yellow goes to yellow. These two can't go together obviously, so it's this one, and it doesn't really matter which one because they're both the two yellows that are the same are the brakes, and so they go, it doesn't matter, they both just shut off the motor, so they're the same. You can mix them up. The only thing you have to do is make sure you line up the two arrows. The throttle, connect again, we'll line up the arrows. Oh, there doesn't seem to be an arrow in this one. Interesting. It is keyed so you can only put it in one way. So if it's missing the arrow like this one is, just take a look at how it's keyed and line up the key. I'm going to put the cap back on the other brake. This is for the wiring harness here. So there's two caps. So I came around to the other side so that I'm not leaning over the camera and everything. Line up the arrows. And it should push straight together. There. So I'm going to be tie wrapping this later to hold it all in place. But once I get the battery hooked up, I can actually test the motor, I think. We still have to hook up the speed sensor, and there's also a shift sensor. The shift sensor isn't necessary. I believe the speed sensor is. So let's hook up the battery and see what happens without hooking those two up. So I have the bike tie wrapped up. I've disconnected the speed sensor here just to show you what happens when you don't have the speed sensor connected. When we turn it on, it doesn't know that it's not connected. But when you start to go, there it is. Hope you guys can see that, it's really bright here. So in fourth gear, the thing will actually do 40k, at least 40 kilometers an hour, and that's with an unmodified motor. Pretty sweet. In first gear, in assist 3 with just the throttle, it's pretty intense. Especially with this three-wheel. In assist 1, it's more gentle. there it is, complete. I think on one of the first trips we did anywhere between 30 and 50 kilometers before recharging the battery. And a couple things that I was going to show you is why I only installed the one brake that has the motor shut off and not on the other side. Because on this side, because it has two wheels, it has two separate brake cables. So this is a special brake cable or brake lever. And so I'd either have to have only one wheel brake and then it pulls to one side, or leave it this way. So I decided to leave it this way. And it will run without the speed sensor hooked up, and it seems to run at whatever speed you set it at. So if it's in assist 1 or assist 3 or whatever, it stays in that assist mode. But you can't change it after that. So you'd have to turn the power off, turn it back on, select the assist level, and then you've got no display pretty much. So if you're running it without a display, you could run it without this. You just I think you can get a sensor, a Bluetooth connector, so that you can connect, instead of having the head at the front here, the display at the front, you can have it hooked up to your phone. You could set a few of the functions and then just drive it. The benefits of that are that you don't have a display advertising that you've got an electric bike, but kind of when you look at it, it does look electric, and when you see it moving, it definitely looks electric. So it will go, and that's right out of the box without any modifications. And that's the Bafang 1000 watt motor. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below and I'll try and answer them. Questions specific to this bike or this motor, I'll try to answer them for you. And I do have another 1000 watt motor that I'm going to hook up to another bike. That'll be a nice project. That's my bike. It's a cruiser bike, so that'll be fun. So don't forget to like and subscribe.